Landry here, coming with another episode on narcissistic abuse and how I survived and my personal experiences. My first episode kind of touched on the key points that I experienced personally with living with a narcissist. And I wanted to go ahead and continue this series, touching on each individual point a little bit more in depth. So, that being said, today I'm going to discuss the isolation. I chose this one as the first key point that I'm going to really dive deep into because I feel like that was the first noticeable change in my life that caused me to feel stuck under the control of the narcissist. And it's funny because it was sneaky, you know. When it initially began, it didn't seem malicious. It actually seemed pretty awesome. Um, Initially, when I was with this person, we moved really fast, like became very close, spending a lot of time together. It was a lot of constant text messaging, phone calls, rushing to my house after he was done with work, wanting to spend every waking moment with me. And, going from being single for several years to all of a sudden having this man super interested in me, wants to spend time with me. Who wouldn't want that? So, I became very excited about the opportunity to be able to spend time with somebody and felt like he genuinely cared about spending time with me. So the fact that he wanted to spend every waking moment with me when we weren't at work led into little changes, like me going from hanging out with friends and going to see my family to little by little that was coming to an end. And at first, I didn't really notice it as an issue until it was too late. And I realized that I was left with almost nothing. So, from the beginning of that, it was that positive feeling and not feeling like I was being taken away from my support system. Then things changed. They changed rather quickly. Once he felt like he had his claws in me and I was controllable, it turned into very obvious isolation. Um, it went from him treating me well with all the love bombing and the wanting to spend quality time because he knew that was important to me, to suddenly he was doing things out of character, or at least it seemed it was out of character. This was his true character, but I didn't know that at the time. Where he would leave and tell me that he was going to do things like run errands or, go see friends. But then I quickly found out that he was actually cheating on me with another woman. And so then it went from wanting to spend time together because it felt good to suddenly being afraid that he was going to hurt me every time he left the house. So I didn't want to be away from him, but he would constantly leave and leave me in a panic. And so then it made me not want to go do anything because the longer I was away from him, the more opportunity he had to hurt me and lie to me. And it just became this vicious cycle. And by that time, I had already tried to kick him out, get him out of my life. But that's where that control came in, where there would be threats of taking everything from me. There would be threats of him harming himself. Like, for instance, when he got caught cheating on me, I was actually sent pictures of him with the other woman at a local bar because one of my friends, whom he did not know was friends with me, happened to be at that same location and initially thought that the woman was me because we looked very similar at that time. And she ended up sending me the pictures of them together. When I confronted him, I told him I didn't want to be with him anymore because it was just a few months into the relationship, and that I didn't want to get hurt anymore because I had already had a disastrous marriage in the past and it just wasn't right. And he, that night, threatened to kill himself. Um, he pulled guns on more than one occasion, threatening to end his life if I left him. So I became terrified. Um, and then the fact that he had taken me from all of my friends at that point and my family, who was I going to talk to? You know, um, and that's the part where a lot of us that have been through this abuse, you know, we start to feel crazy because, you know, the outside world only sees one version of what's really going on. And we're oftentimes silent because we're afraid to say anything. And also, we've been taken away from our support system. So we have no place to turn because this person wants you to solely rely on them so that they can control you. So that was kind of the first parts of the isolation. And throughout the years, it continued to gradually get worse. You know, it went from me being able to live life, go run errands, go, you know, see my friends and my family, to absolutely nothing without being on a time clock, without having to report every minute of every day where I was. It's like I spent almost 10 years in the military. I am tired of having to report where I'm at, what I'm doing, you know, or being told what I can and cannot do. You know, I've always been a very independent person. So this was a very difficult time for me, having somebody that wanted to control literally every aspect of my life and let me have no outreach to the outside world. While we were together, we rarely ever spent time with any other friends. The only time you would really see us out was at, you know, powerlifting events and, you know, training. Beyond that, you know, there was several, you know, team building events at our local gym. There was several times that friends had invited us to spend time, and he would be incredibly selective on what we did, how long we were there, what I was allowed to say. And it even went as far as when I really got to the point where I knew I had to get out for safety reasons, that I knew that I needed counseling, and he discontinued my son's counseling and my counseling because he was afraid that we would talk about him to the counselors, which is absolutely insane. Um, but at that time, I listened. I was afraid. And so I discontinued counseling for some time because I was in a specialty program for my PTSD from my previous military experience. So then it turned into me having to sneak mental health services. Um, Thankfully, the Wounded Warrior Project, they've been incredibly supportive. I am an alumni with them. I was able to do telehealth counseling calls over the phone. Um, I would schedule them when he would leave to go coach so that I had the opportunity to talk to somebody. And, you know, it was very helpful, but it also was very eye opening. You know, the counselor was amazing, and she was seeing kind of what was going on and trying to help me navigate getting out of that situation. That was the initial cry for help. And that was, gosh, like almost 3 years ago at this point, roughly. Um, to feel like you have to like hide getting help for your mental capacity is just not a fun feeling at all. Um, you know, there's already a major stigma on mental health and, you know, the invisible wounds. And then to have somebody who's supposed to be supportive and be your partner not allowing you to get the help that you need and being the main cause of a lot of the unraveling that you're feeling emotionally is just, it's heartbreaking. And it's very frustrating to me that I was so much under his thumb that I complied with a lot of like what he was demanding. And unless you've been in that position, you don't understand how hard it is to stand up to these people, because when you do, it gets really bad. And I kind of touched on that in the previous video, where if I would stand up to him, he would get really ugly. He would get physical. He would get very like verbally abusive. He liked to corner me in rooms. So he already knew that I have a problem with closed spaces, because part of my triggers with PTSD is you'll see me if I'm in a room, I'm always looking for where the exits are. I don't like to have my back to the room. I like to have my back to a wall so I can constantly scan. And I like to feel like I can get out at any moment. So that's part of the reason why I have a hard time going to the grocery store, because I feel exposed and I'm not always by an exit. So there's always that feeling of panic trying to get out. And so he would corner me in like a bathroom or just like a bedroom in an area where I could not get around him. He was a large man, so I'm not going to be able to like move him. So he basically had me isolated, afraid in my own home, which again, part of my PTSD, I was attacked in my own home with gun violence. And so I already struggle with feeling safe at home. So here we are, being isolated from friends and family and being isolated to my home that now I do not feel safe in. So it's just like compiling upon itself. And it's like every day was just a battle to get out of bed and face the day, because I knew that I wasn't allowed to live anymore. I wasn't allowed to reach out to people for help. I spent so many years pretending to people like this person was a good person. And then in the end, when everything just imploded, you have those feelings of who's going to believe me, because I spent all of this time protecting this person who was not protecting me. And that was all part of the plan with him, is making sure that I was isolated to the point where I did not have the strength, I did not have the support to be able to face him, to be able to get out without major recourse, which is what I ultimately ended up with. It's just, it's sick what happened. It was even so bad that, like, we lived within a couple minutes of his own family. And for the longest time, I was not allowed to, like, spend time with them. He didn't want to spend time with them. I had asked for help with my son because I was coaching in the afternoons and my son was doing wrestling and jiu-jitsu. And I had asked his mother if it was okay if she could help me out running him to and from practice on days that I had to work. And she was more than willing to. She was an amazing woman. She, biggest heart, just beautiful person inside and out. She passed away last year in April, but she wanted to help. She treated my son and I like family, and she saw what was happening as well. We had talks about the situation before she passed away, and he found out that she was helping, and he lost it on me and made it so that she wasn't allowed to help anymore. So then I wasn't able to get my son to where he needed to be without me missing work. So I had to call off work quite a bit because I was the only one that would take him to and from anything. And, I had asked him, I was like, well, then if your mom's not going to be able to do it, can you please help me? And the answer was, oh, hell no. Like, I don't want to do that. I'm not a kid person. It's not my responsibility. And it's like, well, if you're going to take away all of my resources to get help so that, my son and I can have a good life, we can have, just help in general and have a family, I don't know what you expect me to do. So that was a really difficult thing because it's like they were literally right down the street and so supportive, but yet I was not allowed to have that support. I briefly touched on my own family. They're up in Michigan, and we when we first got together, so we got together in the fall of 2018, and we had our first Thanksgiving together. I had invited him up there to see my family. We drove over 3 hours to get there. He had a meltdown. We were there for maybe 20 minutes, and he made us leave. And that was the last time that I got to spend time with my family the entire time that we were together for over 5 years. He said he was disgusted by the fact that they were touching the food, that, they weren't like his family, so he wasn't comfortable. But then when I would ask if I could go up there by myself, that was an absolute no. Um, because he feared that I might talk to some other guy because I was going without him. And I'm like, well, you're more than willing to go with me, but you don't want to, so that's not my fault. It went as far as after COVID, we had built a garage gym, which was great. Don't get me wrong. I absolutely love training in there. However, that was more isolation because he would not allow me to go to a regular gym. Even if there was movements or something that I needed, like spotters or a certain piece of equipment that we did not have, he would not let me go to a gym without him. And he said it's because there might be other men there. Like, we live in a society that there are men and women. Like, hate to break it to you, but no matter where I go, there's going to be a man more than likely, unless I'm going to like a nunnery, but that's not happening. um, but that is what I dealt with. He was afraid for me to even go to the grocery store because there might be a guy there that was interested. Every time I went anywhere without him, he was constantly asking who I was talking to. He was monitoring my phone. He was always looking over my shoulder. Even when it came to my business, like, I'm an online strength and nutrition coach. He was trying to control and isolate me from my clients. Like, if he didn't feel comfortable, like, he would not allow me to do certain things, or he would make me stop working. I wasn't allowed to work with male clients unless it was something that he approved. Um, there was certain situations where I wasn't allowed to like collaborate with certain people. I wasn't allowed to go places. Like, I have a lot of opportunities with these big competitions. I have a lot of opportunities with my sponsors and, events and whatnot. And he would isolate me from all of that. Even when we were out in public, when we were at like powerlifting events, he would isolate me from the people that we were around. Like, yeah, we were there, but like, I really wasn't allowed to talk. And he would watch me. Like, if I was not in his sight for, more than a couple of minutes, I would be getting phone calls. I would be getting text messages. He would start asking people, well, where's Landry? Where did she go? And it's like, I should not have to be on a leash away from other people at an event that we're both at. Like, there's no reason to behave that way. And so this just continued to happen over time. And, you know, it just, it made things harder and harder to leave. And now I'm finding that the isolation is still continuing. So he isolated me from my support system up in Ohio and Michigan. And it got so bad because in the end, I ultimately had to move cross country to get away from this person. He even went as far as like making me feel unsafe after the fact, after he finally did leave my home and I like kicked him out officially. The police in that area allowed him, even though I owned the home, this man had no rights to it, nothing. Because he could claim residency because he had mail going to the home, They allowed him to continuously come into my home whenever he wanted to. And I had filed for a restraining order, which we're still pending because for whatever reason, we're not going to get into the legalities of that right now. But even with that, the police still allowed him in my home. So then he isolates me from feeling safe in my own home. He isolated me from my son because when I finally did kick him out, he went from not wanting anything to do with my child to all of a sudden making sure that the moment that my son got home from school till the moment that he went to bed, that he was in his company until the very end. And before I know it, my son had been brainwashed to the point where now he wants nothing to do with me. So he isolated my son and I from one another. So my entire family has just been completely decimated at this point. I don't know if I'm ever going to get to have a relationship with my son at this point. I pray to God that he comes back around and sees the truth. But until that day comes, I just have to keep praying because that's all I can do. Because I've been painted out to be, you know, this bad mom and, you know, that I don't care. And it's like, I literally have raised my child by myself since he was a toddler. And I have given him literally every opportunity he could possibly want. He's never gone without. And this man convinced my child that I was not doing my job when he has no kids of his own, wanted no kids of his own, and didn't want any kids once he was with me. And that was really hard for me because, you know, I kept telling him, we are a package deal. This is not just you and I in a relationship. I have a child. You need to accept this child. I am a girl that came from a family where, you know, I was not the dad's child. Until I didn't find out till I was 16 that he wasn't my real dad, but he always treated me differently. He did not treat me well compared to my other sisters, whom they were very close to him. And so the last thing that I wanted was to have this stepfather figure in my son's life that treats him the same way that I had to grow up, because that was very painful for me. So I have lost my son because of the isolation. And then to top it off, I ended up having to sell everything that I own, pick up and leave. And I literally moved across country with only my clothes, my dog, and my computer and my car, and had to completely start over because this man would not stop. Like, he is relentless about this control. Anything that he could do to continue to keep his claws in me, he was doing. And it's still happening. Like, immediately after I left, he started posting about another woman at the gym that we used to train at. You know, while we were together, he never wanted to do team building events with our gym. But then suddenly, all of a sudden, I'm seeing posts from the old gym with him actively participating in the events, when that was something that he constantly told me all the time, like, oh my gosh, like, I don't want to do this. It's stupid. We don't need to be a part of that. But all of a sudden now you think that that's great and you want to be a part of that. And that's how they continue to isolate their victim, because even now that we're not together and I am not anywhere near that area anymore, he has made sure that I cannot come back, because he has embedded himself so deeply into the old circles that we used to run in that I no longer know what kind of support system I have there anymore. I know there's a couple of people in the area that I can rely on, but beyond that, like, I could never go back to my old gym. I could never move back there. Granted, I won't. I don't want to go back to Ohio. But I'm just saying, like, to see the fact that even after the dust has settled, this person is still trying to cause undue harm. This person is still trying to isolate me from life, from my family, from my friends, from my community, while he walks around like nothing happened. And it's very difficult to sit here and not speak up, and that's why I'm making these videos, because I sat in silence for over 5 years. I was made to look like the crazy person, and I'm here to tell you, like, you can think what you want. I know there's still people out there that will look at me like, yeah, she's crazy, like she's making this up, because that's how a narcissist, like, makes their victim not look like a victim. Like, they will literally silence us, make us afraid to say anything, make us question our own, like, mental state. Like, am I crazy? Maybe I'm crazy. I've had situations recently where, I have sat back and been like, did I overreact? Was this really that bad? Maybe. I don't know. But then I've had people come forward that know this person, and they 100% validated the fact that I'm not crazy, that I was not the only one that had this happen to them, that, you know, there are so many people that are glad that I'm coming forward and speaking out about this, because it is something that so many people won't, because of the personal attacks, the, the isolation. Because, like, okay, I'm speaking out now. What happens if somebody comes after me? Well, telling me that I am full of crap, like whatever that looks like. Who do I have to turn to as a support system? I just moved across country. I have, like, no support system here. I have a great following on social media, but at the end of the day, like, and I'm not saying that those people aren't valuable, but as far as, like, real support system, I don't have that anymore. Even my own family, like, I've been isolated from them. Like, I can't even speak to my son at this point. You know, my family in Michigan, I'm not saying that they're, like, bad, but, like, they don't understand. It's difficult to speak to them, because they're like, well, everything seemed fine. Like, what's the deal now? Like, all of a sudden there's a problem. And it's like, you don't get it. And then it's hard to talk about it, because it's, I briefly touched about this as well. Like, you feel ashamed of the stuff that you put up with, the stuff that you didn't talk about, because you were forced to just sit alone with your thoughts, because you weren't allowed to do anything else. And I I'm so glad that I finally ripped the band-aid off and just stood up and left. However, the destruction that has come from doing that has left my life in shambles, and has left me spending a lot of time with myself. So again, I'm a bit isolated. This way, this time, this is my choice to be on my own, to be alone with my thoughts, to process, to heal, to find out who I am. Because after going through all of that, being isolated, being told that you are this, that, the other thing, constantly put down, it's really hard to view yourself in a positive light. And I never want to go back to that place. I am all about moving forward and growing, and never allowing somebody to take my life away again. I am taking risks by being vocal. Um, I am no longer going to make myself small for somebody. I am no longer going to allow somebody to dictate how I live. Um, and I am not going to let him control me anymore. His tactics of isolation at this point, I mean, I've blocked him. I've done everything that I can to alleviate him out of my life. There's absolutely zero contact, thank God. But I've gotten to a point where, like, it literally, other than the aftermath of what he did to me, I do not miss him. I do not find myself being affected by what he does anymore. I've had conversations with some of my athletes, because they've seen some of his behavior. And I'm like, I'm not affected, so you shouldn't be either. This is just showing the true character. And they will eventually. They can only hide who they really are for so long. until it comes to a head. And, like I said, I've had more and more people come forward saying that they've seen not only a change in me in a positive way, but they have seen, like, they noticed that there was something wrong for a long time. And, that it's nice that people notice, but then at the same time it sucks because it's like there was so many times that I wanted to just stand up and say something like help me, please help me. But again, isolation, too afraid, to stand up and say please help me, because who's going to believe me? So I hope that this video helps somebody realize that they're not alone, because that is what these abusers want. Is they want us to feel alone. They want us to feel weak. They want us to feel dependent upon them and them only. That way they can control every aspect of our lives and change who we are. That losing yourself so that you can try to fit the mold of somebody who has this just twisted view of life that's never going to value you. And so if you are experiencing this isolation, this pain, this madness, because it will literally make you feel crazy, please reach out. I'm a safe space. I've survived this, and you can too. So don't be afraid to speak up. Don't be afraid to ask for help. It's going to be okay. And you're not crazy. You're not alone. You can do this. Thanks for listening. I'll be back soon with another episode. Stay tuned.